Since Peter is on a roll of a fabulous conversation, we will now go to the session why collaboration will be the critical driver of Canada. And I can't think of anybody better to do that than Peter Schwartz, who's passionate about this issue. So you will see for yourself what I'm talking about. So I'm going to get out of the thing and let Peter take over from here. So Peter, it's all yours.
Thank you, Bashir. And again, thank you for putting this event on and for the opportunity to come and say a few words. But of course, I'd be remiss not to thank Bruce for joining us today. Always been a fan of Bruce, and as colleagues, we've always been able to learn from one another. And this issue of collaboration and his desire to make sure he's doing his part, you know, after many, many years of success as an entrepreneur and now as an investor, certainly inspires me. And I think as we think about where we are today in 2021 and his very pointed comments about the beginning of the pandemic and how we all reacted, starting with being stunned, as he said, and then moving quickly to the resilience that, you know, comes out of nowhere, but mostly the collaboration that we saw, people helping people, businesses helping business. And it's been a very, very difficult period for, you know, all of Canada, and with the compounding issues around change in administration, policy, getting vaccines out, we have to think about those businesses that have struggled and the people who have that as their only livelihood, having their worlds turned upside down. And from my experience, the number one asset that we have, not just in this country, but around the world. And as we see those borders shrink, and, you know, China does not seem so far away from when I was young and getting started in my career, collaboration is the key. And I think when we look at that as the central theme of today's events and the underpinning of my own career, having started out building logistics networks with technology that, you know, was pre-internet in many ways, stitching together EDI and mobile computers in a way that would allow companies that were well out ahead of the need to collaborate, FedEx being probably the most marquee example. We've seen those trends and themes move quite slowly over the last 20 to 30 years, despite what looks like a lot of technological innovation. In many ways, we're at the end of one era and we're moving into another one, and at warp speed, and ushered in by the pandemic. The things we've seen as consumers that have, you know, come out of nowhere with large corporations that typically move quite slowly. Small businesses being able to use a platform to rise up and address, you know, what is a very difficult market to compete in, being retail. These are all things that give me hope. And as, you know, we have those tools at our disposal now, it's upon us to put them to work. I can also say that collaboration is something that we often take for granted when it works seamlessly. You know, I can tell you, listening to FedEx in the early days with their vision, you know, next day delivery for $20-something seemed almost incredible, especially being behind the scenes, building the technology that helped them. For example, with their cargo networks, there was an extreme amount of collaboration that went into delivering to that expectation or to that market opportunity as it was for them. And in this last 12 months, I would say, and the numbers prove it, if, you know, commerce, online commerce was 15% of commerce over that 20-year period, and it doubled, skyrocketed to 30 just in this last 12 months. We know why, but at the same time, I think we handled it pretty well. So when it works seamlessly, we take it for granted as consumers, and we may not see what goes in behind that. For me, that's extremely inspirational, because when you know something works, right, and everybody starts to pile on, it creates more opportunity for the people who want to take it to the next level, who see the opportunity. For example, when I was discussing with Bruce just a few minutes ago, the idea of our concern for the environment and the idea of, being focused on what's ahead for the next generation, what we've done to this planet, for example, collaboration will start to take over. When we look at, for example, the automotive industry, two ways to grow market share. One is to grow your business. One is to take market share from others. Those of you who study automotive data will know new car sales were down 20% this year. Not a surprise, but Elon Musk at Tesla excelled. And he did so by taking market share from his competitors. Looking forward, you could probably say Elon Musk will have a next act, and there'll be, differentiation, as we saw, for example, with Lululemon when they created the notion of a lifestyle brand to differentiate themselves in what looked like the retail market, or Shopify, and how you may see them as one thing when really, when you get behind the scenes, it's something quite different, quite complex. But we're going to see wholesale change, which will be driven by collaboration. There is a whole market for ride sharing. There's a market for home delivery. We're going to see significant change in that market. Knowing where a car is and where demand for that car is, for example, right now extracts a very large revenue for a handful of brands that don't own the means of distribution or transportation. And we have oversupply. So we're going to see some of the traditional tried and true operations research come to play, where we'll start to connect those dots. We'll start to have consumers accessing, available capacity without that tariff. The market for automobiles will turn into a market for collaboration, whereby those automobile manufacturers can build direct connections with people who require access to those things. We'll see, following Professor Scott Galloway and his discussion, his relentless discussion around what he calls rundles, or the subscription economy that we're entering into. Some of the very same themes will apply. Right now, it looks like a lease to own a car, and to the untrained eye, why would you lease a car when you don't need it all the time? Well, that's the basis for the ride sharing market. But there are structural imbalances and disproportionate revenue that is being directed toward connecting supply and demand. And those are typically built on brokerage models. And as those brokerage models come under pressure, and some of the slower moving innovators start to ramp up. I remember years ago reading on just about every social media feed I had about how these companies that are the most powerful companies on the planet own nothing. And of course, the byline was they have this really exciting technology. Most operations research practitioners will say connecting via satellite, somebody's click with somebody else's availability is really just a matter of getting that all into one place. There's value in that, but the technology itself is not the barrier to entry. What we're going to see coming out of the pandemic in particular, but generally as an overall market trend that might have taken 2 or 3 years longer and has now been dropped upon us, we're going to see an acceleration of collaboration. We're going to see that money that is tied up in connecting one click to availability be distributed across the people that are manufacturing the cars, and people like you and I who have a car that's sitting idle that can be utilized, and that lease then becomes a subscription, and that subscription can have value based on it being put to work another way. These are not complex problems to identify, but they're challenging problems to solve. And as Bruce and I talked about, how the resilience of Canadians and generally entrepreneurs and investors around the world, is something we've always come to expect and appreciate, particularly here in Canada, with so much technology and innovation at our fingertips. But none of us really expected those companies that were called down or called laggards as that era was being ushered in, and consumers were very quickly gravitating toward a handful of brands in the ride-sharing space, for example. We're seeing some real catch-up. We're seeing, the retailers themselves become quite agile. In particular, when we look at Shopify and Walmart and the partnership between the two of them, the realization, for example, that pickup is a thing. Do we really need to have our razors and all other consumer products we consume delivered to our doorstep? And how can the providers of goods and services that we consume find alternative ways to be always on with the consumer, to be available as you need them, but to also leverage the fact that you're driving right on by. So we're going to see some wholesale change, and it's all going to be about collaboration. Who would have thought that Walmart would announce just a few months ago that they would convert 70% of their retail stores into pickup and return depots? I mean, that's underway now. They were sort of shocked into that as a result of the pandemic. Most large retailers who have been fortunate enough to remain open and who could provide, deep supply chains and meet the test despite the struggles of small business and my own support of small business and hoping we don't overlook any of them, those massive infrastructures that exist today, dropping in with a new brand and trying to offer an alternative is one thing. Doing it in a way that actually makes money, where you can meet what the consumer expects in terms of, I want it now and I want it the way I want it, hyper-personalization, direct to consumer being something that is attractive to us. We're going to see, for example, a value proposition that plays out with Shopify and Walmart and other large retailers where they have encapsulated that infrastructure and said, oh, look, if there is a trend away from shopping in stores, I personally enjoy it. I personally enjoy supporting small business as well. And I think it's important for us to do that. But there's a whole world of opportunity here around collaboration. Even Walmart and TikTok, now that we know what consumers want, then how can we provide that to them? And maybe not just by taking, the Amazon approach of $15 billion worth of advertising revenue that subsidizes the inefficiencies that they have in their distribution model. And again, don't ever count Jeff Bezos out. And equally, he is a logistics company, and that's not to be discredited. But the combined infrastructure that exists with all of the major retailers, the consumer audiences that are already assembled through various programs, that loyalty programs, other membership programs, the subscription economy will turn a lot of that on its head. And technology companies that were looking to do one simple thing, will now play on, what is the key ingredient that this summit is here to address, which is how Canada grows into the future with strength. In my mind, collaboration is something Canadians have a very proud history of doing. Whether it's winter and having to figure out how to, work into your schedule, getting the snow off the driveway before you can back out, the extra time it takes you to get to work, and all of the other things that shut down that, otherwise you would need to survive if you go right into Northern Canada. The level of collaboration that exists between supply lines, people helping people, government working with the people, or maybe not so much, are all examples of collaboration or opportunities for more collaboration. And I think, this country is tailor-made for arbitraging that opportunity, building a country that is wider east to west than just about any other country in the world, or any other trading lane in the world. And doing that in the 1800s was an accomplishment and a testament to collaboration here in this country. And I think when we talk about our future here in Canada and think about our proud history of doing that, it's not a surprise that we have a lot of world-class B2B technology companies here, as opposed to what we would typically have south of the border, which is a consumer-driven technology, something that identifies quickly with what we as consumers want and need, and how to tap us for that, whether it's taking our data from a negative standpoint and using it in ways that benefit the company and not the people that are actually providing the goods and services, or those of us who may not understand why someone is addicted to something, or those of us who are addicted to things. And instead of having those forces in front of commerce, collaboration can start from the bottom up. I consume this and I consume that. I'm really the same person. Why am I going through a third party to get from A to B? Why can't I work directly with others. Those are all things that here in this country we've tackled for years as technologists, as practitioners who have built B2B technology companies. By definition, you are tested by your customers to show that your things work and that they deliver. And in today's world, they have to deliver not just to what provides efficiencies for your customers. I mean, that is the era of technology I first grew up with. You know, technology that would help a business gain efficiencies or value by using our technology. And of course, that model was exploded by the advent of the internet. No longer do we have to wait to get information from sources that were difficult to put together. It was all there in front of you. So network-based business models and network effects took hold, logistics and transportation being right at the start of that revolution. If you think about that just for a moment, the idea that you would have a system that would make your own plant or your own warehouse more efficient was interesting, and you could sell technology at that level, provided the technology you were selling generated more value than what you charged for it. But as you look one step down the road and you see how very quickly networks formed, systems that were designed to manage things inside one business gave way to systems that had to be collaborative. In our case, looking back to my history with Descartes Systems Group, fundamentally, as enterprise software hit the stage, we saw the opportunity to take an alternative approach, one whereby we would not build a system around, how you account for things, which is effectively the basis of an enterprise system. We would know about what was going on in a network, in a supply chain, in an ecosystem. And that required separating the ownership of inventory from its state or where it was located. And those are fundamentally different systems. As we see what was built here in this country, and I could name countless examples, OpenText, Shopify being two great examples of companies that hit collaboration very early on in their development cycle. Those required different infrastructures than having you click on something, getting your data, selling it to somebody else for advertising purposes, and using that to subsidize a consumer expectation that has emerged. But I think we've reached the tipping point in terms of what consumers expect. I don't think we're delivering it everywhere. It's being delivered by a handful of early adopters and ones that will have to protect their businesses from what is a trend toward collaboration or transform, because ad-supported models like the enterprise software models of the past, they knew very little about what was going on in a network. The idea of creating a forecast, which is the way we often think about analyzing historical data and figuring out what we have to produce for next year, right, really doesn't exist in a company like FedEx. You literally execute and your planning is done dynamically. That requires different data, different information, a deeper level of connectivity, all sorts of aspects of designing and building systems that take years to master. So B2B companies, particularly in this country, are built over many, many years. Shopify, as they joke, was a 10-year overnight success. It was at least that for us at Descartes to achieve what we did, and we could go on. This country is resilient, this country is creative, and this country is also able to deal with what it was dealt. We are not typically able to put the momentum and force around something that appeals to a consumer very quickly and write it down on a page or two. Powerful brands south of the border, and what has happened with social media, for example, over the last few years, and what we call soft brands, has a fundamental set of desires in it that consumers are excited about. But how much better can they be? You can't want it yesterday. There's a lot of talk about anticipating what you need and having it there on time, but those are all table stakes that companies like FedEx and others have been delivering to for some time. So once you know what the consumer wants, and that starts the bus rolling, then another level of technology we see here in this country, B2B technology, can not only provide efficiencies for the businesses that use that technology and allow them to compete where they otherwise couldn't, but we'll also see how we can excite the consumer, perhaps in ways that we didn't think were possible, or that the game was already won by this ride sharing company or that social media company. And it's not just saying there was a MySpace and then along came a Facebook. This is a different paradigm. Collaboration as a theme, collaboration as a strength of this country, collaboration as a necessity for somebody building business to business software, for example, and the move toward all of what we're seeing out there in the market is moving at warp speed during this pandemic and leaving all sorts of breadcrumbs for us to pay attention to, certainly as technology companies, as investors, but also as consumers. There are lots of ways consumers will benefit by not dealing exclusively with companies that rely on ad dollars or subsidization to make their models work. I think when you look at how collaboration, as I've just described, and particularly here in Canada with the number of B2B technology companies that we are proud to have created over the years and supported as investors and entrepreneurs, collaboration as a theme ties all aspects of our country together. Public sector to private sector, province to province, rural to urban, liberal to green, NDP to conservative, established business to entrepreneur, small business to large business. Nothing happens in this country without it. And that's one of the reasons why I'm proud to be Canadian and proud to know as many great Canadian entrepreneurs as I know, and as many great Canadian executives running large corporations coast to coast who have responded to almost overnight in ways we didn't think they could, just given their own planning cycles, and realize just how many of their assets are already deployed in ways that if they can think just a little bit differently, be a little bit more patient, be a little bit more willing to change, there's nothing like a crisis to force people to be creative and to think more deeply about what they read on social media about who's worth all the money. And yet, you know, we haven't even heard from the people that own the assets or that provide tremendous added value to those assets. And that's really what a retailer is. On one hand, you could call them a broker, but they're much more complex than that. They have much more to offer, whether that's a place where you can pick things up or drop things off, as I described the Walmart transformation, as opposed to what we saw years ago, Walmart acquiring Jet.com and looking to compete with Amazon head on. They look a little bit more like what Shopify has brought to small retailers as they first brought their solution to market. You know, on a one pager, it might have looked like retail tech that was really easy to put in and only cost you a few dollars per month. You know, those of us who pay very, very close attention to what they did know that they solved for what I would call the gray space. How many people know that Shopify was really about solving credit, trade credit, for retailers who otherwise couldn't gain credit, or for their, you know, monumental acquisition a couple of years ago that put them square into the logistics space, or recently with Shop, how they could provide distributed shopping in a way that would excite consumers and bring those individual little retailers together on a collaborative platform that they could all use for their own purposes, but at the same time access a common infrastructure. And that needs to be safe. We need to be able to build safe environments where we can collaborate. We need technology that respects your data. As we see the world move toward this consumer-led, direct-to-consumer, hyper-personalized model that is all around us, we'll see technology for the good on the back of some of this massive infrastructure. We'll see smaller retailers or larger retailers who are threatened alike be able to meet the value propositions that consumers are demanding, and in record pace, because technology that supports collaboration, while it's complex and takes a long time to build, provides that safety, allows people to deploy the technology in a way that meets what the standards are that the market has set, while also allowing people to punch above their weight. Same day delivery, next day delivery, you know, these are all challenges that we will see overcome one by one as people adopt technology that is more collaborative and as we see this become more mainstream. So whether it's curbside pickup, right, or it's any of the other innovations we've seen from Shopify, just to call them out, This is only just the beginning, and Canada is extremely well positioned with its technology assets and the creative entrepreneurs who have lived in B2B for years. I can tell you, for the years that I was an investor, that was one of the easiest parts of investing in technology B2B, is by the time they've become something, their things work. You don't have to worry so much about trends. What is the next Facebook when you're an investor in MySpace? What is TikTok going to do to Instagram? Those are very difficult things to solve for, and it's a pretty high stakes game. But when you're dealing with B2B technology, the customers that use it know it works. And those companies over many, many years have refined and perfected that to a point where you can't just wake up one day and read Professor Galloway's book and say, right then, I'm going to start a technology company that is going to go right into the center of that. This is the beauty of investing in technology growth. And this is the beauty of this country and the resilient and creative entrepreneurs who for many, many years have built world-class B2B technology companies. I believe that, this solving for the gray space will also create a slightly different culture. While we had to move fast during this pandemic, we shouldn't move too fast to summarize things. If you were to ask, and not to call them out again, but if you were to ask Shopify to describe their platform and what it does, that would not fit on a one-pager. I've said many, many times, by the time you have a one-pager, it's already working. It shouldn't discourage you from creating one-pagers and summarizing things and doing a good job to get to the next step, for example, when you're trying to get somebody to adopt your technology. But patience will be a virtue. Complexity and change are the new realities that as technology entrepreneurs, we need to embrace. And frankly, most of them are excited by it. It's not a problem for them. So join in the party. It's warm in there. And we're seeing some great successes here in Canada. It's one of our biggest strengths, B2B technology. There are so many examples. I named a few here, but it continues, it goes on. And I see that happening very quietly because we don't have the sensation of a TikTok or a Quibi or for what that ended up being. We can look from the bottom up. We can study and examine their models. We can see why it is that they've managed to meet some level of success when it does not seem self-evident from what you read this morning in your Twitter feed. But I can tell you in closing, I've been very fortunate to meet a tremendous number of great Canadian entrepreneurs. Bruce Croxon was just on with us. His second act was to back and invest in them with Round 13 Capital. I'm proud of Bruce. I'm proud of many others like Bruce who in this country are maybe just a little bit more quiet, maybe just a little bit more modest. Bruce certainly fitting in that category, given some of his counterparts around the world. And in the B2B game, stability is important. So I think we're going to see some good times ahead when we look at what these investors have been digging into. I think we're going to see collaboration touch all of us in a way that maybe we didn't think when we just read over that word. I hope I was able to give you a couple of things to think about today, some thoughts that are maybe a little different than you saw this morning. And my task in life is to keep learning and to keep reaching out to the others who came before me, who helped me learn what worked for them and what didn't, without trying to follow trends, but instead doing things that have meaningful value. That's what collaboration is all about. I'm extremely excited to have been asked to moderate the panel that is upcoming. We have a tremendous lineup of folks, which I'll speak to you about shortly. But in closing, I would like to say that to all of our colleagues, friends, family who are struggling at this time, we wish you all well. I hope that things get better for everyone who has been hit hard by this pandemic. I've talked about a few successes. Not only should we celebrate those, but we should think about how to bring those two things together, not just as business people or technologists, but as philanthropists as well. And you see a lot of that in this country, a lot of people helping people, and it gives me great confidence, great hope, and a lot of faith. Thank you very much, Bashir, for inviting me on today, and I look forward to the next session.
Wow. If people didn't know who you were and your passion about this, they certainly actually got the full thing. It was fantastic.